in the previous video, we've been trying to create an application called Reminders that's going to list for us all the reminders that we have, and in addition to that, it's going to let us add additional reminders to that list of reminders. And in order to do so, we're going to use forms. So that form has an input which has a type text, and maybe its input field has a name called reminders, such that I can access that data link and that input, let's say another input which is type submit, and maybe I'll give it a big heading that says add reminders. So here is my HTML add template that we created in the previous video. And now, as I said, first let's go ahead and add a title, add reminders, and we're going to create a form, and that form is going to have an action and a method, and we're going to see what each of these mean. But for now, let's just remove that. And as I said, inside of our form, we'd like to have an input which is of type text, and another input which is of type submit. And now what I'll be doing is giving the input a name of add reminders. And so now I'll be or maybe let's just keep it reminder without the add. And now if I go ahead and run my application, so Python manage.py run server, and click on enter and copy that link, and go ahead to our web browser and just paste it here, we can actually just refresh. We can see that now we have this page. However, you can see that we have a URL that takes us to add. So let's say here I add /add, which is the URL of reminder/add. The page is not found, and that's because we did not actually add it to our urls.py. So let's go ahead and add that path. So path add reminders/add. We'll be going to views.add, and let's give it a name of add. And so what is views.add? Add is the function that we have inside of views. And so let's go ahead and create our function add, and it's going to have a request, of course, as an argument, and it's going to be returning that HTML page, which is rendered, of course, upon a request. And that HTML page is add.html, which is found inside of the file called reminders. So now we've added our function, we added the path, and we have the add.html. So now we go ahead and refresh our page. We can see that we are returned with the page, with that add reminder page. So let's say I type in here hello and submit. You can see that nothing actually happens. So what I'd like to do is let something happen whenever I submit, whenever I click on submit. And so if I go ahead now to reminders, hello is not added. So what I'd like to do is actually add reminders to my current list of reminders. And in order to do that, we need to create a form. But first, what I'd like to do is I don't want every time to just type in add and then go, and then to go back I need to remove that. I need to add some link that gets me to navigate between both pages smoothly. And not having me to add them inside of the URL. And so let's go ahead and see how we can do that. So what I can do is add a link inside of my index page, which has a hyperlink, which is going to take me to /reminders/add. And that's whenever I click on, let's say, add new reminder. So now go to that add page. So now if I go ahead and refresh, you can see that we have a new added link. So now if I click on add a new reminder, you can see that we are taken to that page, to that add reminder page. However, what I'd like to do is when I add something on, let's say, hello, and click on submit, I'd like to do is return to the main page. And to do so, we can actually inside of our add.html, inside of the form, what I'd like to do is whenever I submit that form, I need to have an action. And so now let's go ahead and add an action, and that action is going to be executed whenever I submit my form, and that action is to go to reminders/index. So not index, so only /reminders, because as we said, the index page is the default page. It doesn't mean a parameter, a URL, as you can see, so we don't need to add anything. So now if you go ahead and refresh our page, and let's say I click on, let's say, hello, write hello, and click on submit, I am returned to my main page. So you can see now that I can navigate smoothly between the two pages without actually having to add the URLs. You can see that whenever I type in, I am taken to that /add. And now let's say I add anything and just submit, you can see that I am returned to the main page. Now we can notice something, that we have a variable that is holding whatever we are writing, whatever we are submitting. And so what we'd like to do is to use that variable in order to add it to that list. And the way to do so is something we're going to see in a while. But now there's something I would like to pay attention to, actually, is that if you notice that in index.html we have this link right here, but suppose that throughout my application, and whenever I add more and more pages, I decided to change the name of that URL. So let's say I want to change the name from add to something else, and so in that way I have to change that URL right here to the new one in all the pages that I use that link in. And so you can see that this is going to be tedious, and we're going to be searching through all the links that we've used that reminder/add in. But you might see that we can have something that's more efficient and less time consuming, which is to let Django actually figure out the link for us. And the way to do that, we're going to use the name of the link, or the path. So here comes the role of the name. So we're going to call that path by its name. So we don't have to actually specify that parameter of that link. We just call its name. And the way to do that in Django is just by adding in between curly brackets and of course %. I'll be adding that we want the URL with the name add. So in that way we have the name of that path, which is add, and which I'd like to call, and Django is going to figure out that actual URL for me without me having to write it. And I'll be saving that, and let's go ahead and see if that actually works. Let's just also do that for add.html. So instead of adding /reminders between percentage signs and curly bracelets, I'll be adding URL with the name index. Now I just go ahead and refresh my page and click on add a new reminder. You can see that we are taken to that page, that add reminder page. And now let's say I add SSS and submit. I am returned to the main page as well. So you can see that that is more beneficial for us later on whenever we write other programs. Now one thing we can notice is that, for example, inside of our hello project application, we have actually a URL inside of the URLs.py, a path with a name index, and the same goes for the Halloween application. We also have a path with a name index. And so in order for Django not to get confused by which index do we mean, so here for example we added the URL index. So in order for Django to know what index do we mean, so what we'll be doing is add an app name for these URLs. So if we go to urls.py, so in order for Django not to search all the urls.py of this project, so URLs of Halloween and of hello and of reminders, we're going to let it only search the URLs of this application by giving the URLs an app name, and let's give it an app name of reminders. And so now if we go to add.html, so we're going to tell Django to search for a URL that has a name index. However, I don't want it to search all the paths with a name index. I want it to search only with the URLs that have the app name inside of the application, with the app name which is called reminder. So reminders followed by a column and then followed by the name of the path. So in that way, as I said, Django is going to only search for URLs that have an app name called reminders. And we're going to save that, and let's go ahead and save that too. And here also let's add reminders column and then followed by add. So now if we go ahead and refresh our page and now go ahead and click on add a new reminder, you can see that it still works. We are given that add.html page, and let's try to submit, and we are taken to the main page. Now what I'd like to actually do, as I said before, is to whenever I write something, I'd like to add it to my list. So let's see how we can do that. So what I'm going to be doing in order to add that to my list of reminders, I'm first going to add a method which is equal to post. And we've already seen a request method, a get. Every time you type in a URL or a link, you go to another page. The request method implicitly associated with that is called get, which just means I would like to get a particular page. Anytime you're submitting data that has the potential to change something inside of my application by stating the state, let's say of the list of reminders inside of my application, then we generally use a different request method called post, which is right here. Post is generally used to submit data. So this post method is going to give us the ability to send data via a different request method to my add route. So let's go ahead and see if that works. So I'm going to be adding a reminder, let's say eat, and I'm going to submit. So you can see that now I've got an error, and this 403 inside of the parentheses means that the response code that came back. This is an error from Django that means forbidden, and that means I don't have permission to do this for some reason. Now, why don't I have permission to submit this form? It says CSRF verification failed. So CSRF stands for cross-site request forgery, and what that means is it's a security vulnerability that is inherent in some forms if they're not designed in a secure way, meaning that someone could forge a request in a particular website using some form on their own separate website. For example, you might imagine that if someone on a different website might trick the user to submit a form with its data to our add reminders function that adds a new reminder to their reminders list. And maybe that's not a big deal for reminders, but you might imagine in more secure context, more like a bank, for example, they might have a form on their website for the information of your bank account. And so cross-site request forgery, someone else on a form could trick the user to get data that he should not have, and goes to the bank's website to say, I would like to transfer money from this user to another user. So we would like to be able to design forms that are not vulnerable to this security vulnerability, that don't allow the requests to be forged by another website or user. So how can we go about doing this? Well, one strategy that we can use in order to deal with these sorts of attacks is to add into our own forms a hidden cross-site request forgery token, or CSRF token, which is just a unique token that we'll be using for each session. So every time we'll enter that form, we'll have a new token. So every time the user or every user that submits that form is going to have his own unique CSRF, and our web application is going to check to make sure that that token is indeed valid, and if it is valid, then they'll allow the form submission to go through. But this means that for that forgery user won't be able to access those information because he doesn't have that token. So they would fail to check for CSRF request validation. And so it just happens that Django has CSRF validation turned on by default, and it's done via a specific add-on known as Django middleware, which we saw in the second settings.py of our applications. So you can see that here you have Django.middleware.csrf view middleware. And middleware first has the ability in Django to be able to sort of intervene in the quest response processing of a Django request. And so here, these are a bunch of middleware that's installed by default inside of Django application in terms of making sure that we have variable features hooked into this request response process. And one of those is the CSRF view middleware. This feature of Django that allows it to make sure that our requests, whenever we're submitting data and via post, doesn't have a potential to change this application in some way, and that we need to have a CSRF validation in order to do that, which is going to create a unique token for that specific form in order to authenticate the validity of this form, and so to make sure that this form came from the user himself. And in order to be able to add this token to our Django, to our page, Django has given us a way to do that. So inside of my form, I'm going to be adding a CSRF token in that way, in between curly brackets and a percentage sign. And so now let's go ahead and save that and go to add a new reminder, and let's try to add a new reminder. And now you can see that we don't have that error anymore. And if you actually try this, you can see that if you get that CSRF error, try rerunning your series server. If you're still persisting with that error, sometimes it glitches in some computers. So you just type in python-manage.py run server. So you can see that we're able to submit that form successfully without having any errors. And so just to visualize that CSRF token, when we go to that add page, you can see that inside of my form we have an input which is hidden, and its name is CSRF middleware token, and this value is the token, so it's unique for that form only. So if another user goes ahead and opens that form, he's going to have a totally different value for that token. And so that way we validate our form, and each user has his unique CSRF token. And as I said, we were able to smoothly just go to the main list without having any problem in submitting that form. And so what's left for us to actually do to implement that reminders is to add those reminders to my list, and we're going to see that in a while. In the next video we're going to see how we can use another type of form, and we're going to be introducing that in the next video.